Hey everyone, Adri here with Grounded Take Gaming, and today I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about a little game called Palworld, and about the controversy it's created in the gaming community of late. So, for those of you who aren't aware, Palworld is a third-person multiplayer survival game that released on January 19th of this year. And frankly, if that's all that it was, I probably wouldn't feel the need to make this video right now, and the divisive and passionate debate that we see across the internet lately probably wouldn't exist. Well, at least not about this particular issue. I mean, the internet is the internet in the end, after all. So, what is it about Palworld that seems to be so divisive? Well, it boils down to a couple of different factors that I'll be going over in this video. But before I do, I'll just mention that I've included some basic gameplay footage in the background of this video, so you just have something to look at while you listen to me rant. What you're seeing, for those who don't know it, is Hunt Showdown, a first-person extraction horror shooter by Crytek. It's a game that I highly recommend to those who enjoy the genre, even though it does have some monetization elements that I heavily dislike. If you're interested, you can get it for $40 or your regional equivalent on Xbox, PlayStation, and Windows. Or, better yet, wait for a sale. And, of course, you could check out some reviews to help determine if you really would like to try it. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to talking about Palworld. And I'm going to be splitting up the discussion of the controversy surrounding it into a few distinct categories that I feel best explain why so many people either love it or hate it, and also discuss some of the implications that might arise in the games industry due to said controversy. I'll also touch on the topic of a potential lawsuit leveled at Pocket Pair, the publisher and developer of Palworld, by the video game developer Game Freak and the Nintendo company. Let's go ahead and get started by talking about the first and most obvious source of controversy, which is the clear and blatant inspiration that Palworld takes from the Pokemon franchise. As I mentioned before, it's a third-person multiplayer survival game, but it also comes with two other notable elements, with those being the ability to capture some definitely not Pokemon creatures in the wild, as well as the ability to equip and use guns. Yes, Palworld is basically Pokemon with guns. Sound like a gimmick? That's probably because it is. Of course, that isn't to say that a gimmick can't be fun or compelling, but if most of the value of the game is wrapped up in the gimmick, it can be easy to forget or ignore the inherent value, or lack thereof, in the rest of the game's experience. Now, I want to state at this point, for the sake of transparency, I haven't played Palworld yet. Some part of this certainly is because of the controversy surrounding it, but mostly it's because it's an early access title, which is a system that I have my reservations about. I might eventually be interested in doing a full review of the game once it's officially released, probably sometime in the next decade if it follows in the footsteps of most other fan survival games. And trust me, it's been a tempting proposition to grab the game off Steam and jump in with my friends, some of whom I know are already playing it. And that's exactly how so many other hypey, early access fad games have managed to squeeze my money out of me by marketing themselves to take advantage of the FOMO culture of today. Everyone is so worried about missing out on the next big thing in gaming that they feel rushed, even pressured to put their hard-earned money down on yet another unfinished, unoriginal, half-baked, buggy mess of a game that'll probably take another 5 years to officially release, at which point no one will even care anymore because in the end it was just another mediocre flash in the pan. Of course, the developer already has your money at that point, and if they suspect that their game will never again attract that same level of attention, what exactly is their incentive to spend more of their development funds to not only finish the game, but to actually make it good? That being said, that doesn't mean that every early access game is trash. Just look at the game you're watching on your screen right now. Hunt Showdown was first released in early access, and has, after its official release, gone on to become one of my absolute favorite multiplayer shooters ever. A game isn't bad just because it releases first into early access, but there is a reason why so many early access games are bad. Now, I could get stuck ranting about the early access system for far too long, and maybe someday I'll make a dedicated video about it, but Suffice it to say that, while I can't strictly say Palworld is a bad game, I have followed enough of it since its release to know it's definitely not a complete game. Not even close. So many people are rushing to claim that its systems and features are amazing because they're everything they've ever wanted from a Pokemon game. And therein lies the crux of the issue and the heart of my critique. The majority of Palworld's players don't enjoy it primarily for its gritty nature, its controversial subject matter, or its fusion of Pokemon and guns. In most regards, it's really just another run-of-the-mill survival game, and not even a particularly good one at that. There's still a lot of work to be done with this game. But give it another few months, and most people will probably have moved on to the next big fad. I think the true reason why so many players love this game is because it functions as a giant middle finger to Game Freak and Nintendo. Palworld is a statement of anger, of frustration, of resentment, and most importantly, of action. One of the most common statements of praise it receives from its player base is that it is the Pokemon game that they've always wanted, but one which Game Freak has always denied them. More than anything, this is a backlash from years of neglect, disregard, and exploitation of the Pokemon fanbase by Game Freak, a company that has, for too long, been complacent in their position as the sole developer of every mainline title in the franchise's history. It is no coincidence that Palworld's success comes off the heels of one of the worst rated sets of Pokemon games ever released in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which came out just over a year prior. So I get the frustration that so many are feeling right now. I understand where they're coming from. I grew up on Pokemon, which, yes, makes me an old man by today's standards. I honestly really only care about Gen 1 because by the time the Johto League adventures began, it was starting to feel like I would need an actual zoology degree to help me keep up with all the new generations I saw on the horizon. But there will always be a special place in my heart for the franchise, and for Gyarados. I mean, it's an awesome, powerful dragon that evolves from a pitiful little goldfish. How could you not root for it? So, when I see a greedy, multi-billion-dollar company treating a franchise that I love with so much disregard, I feel the need to lash out at it too. But take a moment to just reflect on the whole situation and ask yourself, does it make sense to exact your revenge on a greedy gaming company that sold you some trash games based on a franchise you love by giving yet more of your money to a different, probably greedy company for a different, possibly mediocre game just because it's superficially giving you the things you feel you've been denied? And even if Palworld turns out good in the long run, do you really imagine yourself trading out years of commitment to the Pokemon franchise, an intellectual property that spans almost 3 decades, with a long-running anime series with enough episodes to rival the industry titan One Piece, with a series of games represented by nearly every color known to mankind, and a history of characters and lore that could fill up the Library of Congress, all for the promise of an unknown future with an unknown franchise from a little-known company in Pocket Pair? Are you really gonna do that? It really would be the best way to send a message to Game Freak and Nintendo, but can you really commit to taking the plunge? I'm willing to bet that for the majority of the aggrieved Pokemon fanbase, given it enough time, the answer will ultimately be no. And here's the thing, I don't think you should. If you truly love a game or a story or even just an idea, if you truly have a passion for it, you shouldn't just sit back and watch it be mishandled and disrespected. You shouldn't just give up on it. Consumers have power, arguably even more power than producers. Just like Game Freak and Nintendo, all companies want one thing from us: our money. That is our power, and it is in the best interest of every company to do everything within their power to take yours away. Usually by playing to our basest desires, our impatience, our attention spans, and especially our fears, often our fear of missing out. They know how we tick, and they use it to their advantage, Pocket Pair not excluded. And And all of this is to say that if, in your heart of hearts, what you really want is to stick it to Game Freak and make a statement against the industry, then I'm afraid you're going about it in entirely the wrong way. Scarlet and Violet were released in November of 2022, and most of the money they were ever going to make from it has already been deposited in their fat, bloated bank accounts. Players choosing to support Palworld won't be seen as any sort of loss for them. And never underestimate the delusional arrogance of corporate leadership. From their perspective, they couldn't care less if you buy Palworld, so long as you buy their next Pokemon game. And make no mistake, they have full confidence that you'll do just that. And they may just be right. If experience has taught me anything, it's that most gamers lack impulse control. This isn't a natural or inevitable trend, but rather a conditioned one. Like Pavlov's dog, we've been conditioned by years of corporate marketing strategies to salivate uncontrollably once every little morsel they toss down to us, whether it's sour or savory. That's exactly the reason why we find ourselves in this perpetual cycle of exploitation in the games industry. I could be wrong about this one. I hope I am. I hope gamers are willing to take a collective stand on something. But even if the Pokemon fans supporting Palworld don't go crawling back to Game Freak as soon as the next game is released, even if they stand their ground on principle, I worry that in the end, they'd be choosing the wrong hill to die on. Because if worst comes to worst, and I'll discuss this later when I touch on the possibility of a lawsuit, it may come back to bite them. So, that's the foundation of the controversy. Palworld is Pokemon with guns, and blatantly so. But that's just the start of this rabbit hole. Let's take a little time to talk now about artificial intelligence, AI, or more specifically, AI artwork. So just a little refresher on how AI art works, see what I did there? And bear in mind that I'm not an expert, I'm just some gamer with a mic and an opinion. But as I understand it, from a layman's perspective, it's created by an AI program that combs the internet for as many images and pieces of artwork as it can find, and then scans them, often, maybe always, without the permission from the copyright owners, and uses those scans to create a database of impressions. These impressions can be used in a software program in which keywords can be used as input to establish parameters by which a set of scanned impressions, which match the keywords, can be used to create an original, and I use that word loosely, piece of art from the amalgamation of said impressions. In other words, if you type in brown horse, the AI looks for any images it saved under the word brown, the word horse, or the phrase brown horse, and then combines all those images to create a new image of what the AI thinks a brown horse should look like based on all of its combined assets. Now, some of the more observant of you might be thinking to yourself, but that sounds like theft. And, well, that's basically because it is. I mean, if you or I went from website to website saving images on our computers and then took those images and somehow created a product or service that we then sold for money, we'd be sued, tried, convicted, and thrown in prison before the next new Pokemon game could even hit the store shelves. So then, why aren't AI systems illegal? Well, because we live in a world where nearly every single national government is run by a bunch of computer-illiterate senior citizens who usually aren't shy about taking bribes and who would still be using fax machines today if they could. And if you live in Japan, they still do. By and large, the people running the world don't get it, and they just plain don't care. Granted, there are some downsides to AI artwork. For instance, in the US, AI art cannot be claimed under copyright. So if you build an entire media franchise using AI assets, in theory, anyone is within their legal right to take your artwork and use it however they like, including to make money or even to undermine your franchise. In the long run, this might actually lead to the start of a new era of free, open-source artwork that is owned by no one and usable by everyone. However, it would only be made possible by the largest string of thefts that the world has ever seen. thefts perpetrated against artists who have contributed to some of the most beloved media franchises in modern history, franchises that have shaped hearts, minds, and childhoods. These very same artists could end up facing a future full of hardships and uncertainty, all for the sake of AI development? I don't know about you all, but I want nothing but the best for the people whose talent, hard work, and passion directly contributed to the creation of the games I love and all the fond memories that have helped to shape the person I've become. And so now, let's connect all this talk of AI back to Palworld, and then explore the implications that AI artwork may have for the future of the gaming industry. So, AI and Palworld. Palworld and AI. You might be asking yourself how exactly these two things are connected, although it's likely that many of you already knew before watching this video, and those of you who didn't have probably connected the dots by now. Nonetheless, I'll spell it out plainly. It is commonly suspected that Palworld was created in some part using AI. Pocket Pair has thus far tacitly denied these claims. However, it's commonly known that the CEO of the company has spoken openly in the past about their support for the concept of AI artwork in creating unique Pokemon models. Since Palworld's release on the 19th of this month, accusations of AI usage have been leveled at Pocket Pair by members of the gaming community, with some calling on Pocket Pair to release their concept art. It's believed that using AI in the images could be verified based on various indicators that would be present in such artwork. But Pocket Pair has not done so as of the making of this video, which, on a personal level, makes me wonder how enforceable exactly are the laws around AI art. If you can't technically copyright it, then what happens when a game developer just never confirms the use of AI in the creation of their assets? If they later try to copyright them, what's the justice system gonna do? Give them a pencil and paper or a canvas with paint and brushes and tell them to prove it live in court? Or will they just take their word for it because of a lack of explicit regulations and procedures? Do we actually trust our aging politicians to craft the legislation necessary to shape and guide the development and implementation of these new technologies for the betterment of humanity and the promise of a brighter future? Just something to think about, I guess. But that's more long-term stuff. In the short to mid-term, how will AI affect the gaming industry? Well, we know AI art is cheap, easy, glitchy, and ripe for exploitation, so sadly, it should fit right in. And this should scare you. We already live in a world where the gaming market is absolutely swamped with generic, gimmicky, low-effort, exploitative cash grabs made using purchasable, reusable, and sometimes stolen art assets by shady developers who couldn't care less about the future of the games industry. They exist to use the conditioning that bigger companies have worked so hard to embed in our minds in order to make a quick buck. And it definitely doesn't help that games distributors like Steam do so little to curate the games that they push onto their store page. With the industry's refusal to establish healthy standards, we've been left to sift through all the muck ourselves. And if we want to know if a game we pull out of the filth is solid gold or a soft turd, we have no choice but to give it a nice big bite and hope for the best. Now, just imagine what this whole system, this whole dynamic is going to look like with the introduction of widespread AI usage. Currently, the sorts of developers making these trash games have to grapple with either the costs to buy their assets or the risk that comes with directly stealing them. But AI assets are comparatively cheap, in some cases free, and their usage is only very loosely regulated. The widespread theft that supports the system is committed by the system's developer, with there currently being no avenue for legal recourse, leaving no risk to the AI artist. Cheap, easy, and risk-free. If you thought that the games industry had a problem with trash titles before, just wait until AI enters common usage. We will be completely drowned out by soulless cash grabs, and if they prove to be exceptionally profitable, It's only a matter of time before AAA developers and the sharks who own them get in on the feeding frenzy. And my friends, we are the chum. Don't get me wrong, it's likely that the development of AI and its incorporation into our everyday lives is inevitable. But that doesn't mean that we should either fully reject or fully accept it in any and all forms. To do the former is just a losing battle, and to do the latter would be risky and we may just end up shooting ourselves in the foot. As with most things, AI should be utilized in moderation with appropriate regulations and limitations to ensure that it doesn't get out of hand. So, frankly, we just don't know if AI was used in Palworld, and if there's no system in place to confirm these things, it's possible we never will. Yet, the debate around AI that the game has reignited is an important one for us as a gaming community to have. I think what we can truly agree on is that we want great games at a fair price, and we should always remember that we as consumers do have the power to determine the direction of the games industry if we could just stand together to work toward a common goal. So that's the essence of the AI portion of the conflict surrounding Palworld. Now let's talk about what is perhaps the most incendiary of the controversies we've discussed so far, and that is the inclusion of ethically and morally questionable content included as features in the game. This is actually the section I'll spend the least time talking about, I think, because frankly, regardless of how incendiary the topic may be, it's also the weakest criticism leveled at Palworld. It really all revolves around the fact that the game allows players to kill, butcher, eat, and force their pals into slave labor. Players can also capture humans, just like one would a Pokemon, and do all the same things with their human slaves as they would with their pals, except for eating them. I've looked around quite a bit, and despite seeing people claiming there's cannibalism in the game, I can't seem to find any proof of this. Regardless, these are definitely some pretty dark themes and features for a game so clearly inspired by the cutesy, wholesome Pokemon franchise. And yet, none of these elements are particularly out of place in the games industry more broadly. There are tons of games in which you can do many similar or worse things, and some even have a similarly cute art style. Just look at Ludion Studios' RimWorld as an example. So, frankly, what's really bothering those who are leveling these accusations is the shock value inherent in Palworld's darker take on the monster capture genre. Pocket Pair is just making explicit all the elements that have implicitly existed in the Pokemon universe since the very beginning. I remember when, as a kid, seeing characters in the anime eating meat, thinking to myself, where are they getting this meat from? Is that Pokemon meat? Do they butcher Pokemon in this world? Are there real-world animals like cows and pigs in the Pokemon world that are used for their meat? How are they different from Pokemon? Are Pokemon a different species compared to real-world animals? Even at a young age, I could tap into the darker implications that the Pokemon franchise actively works to avoid. And that's fine. It's a franchise that's primarily, though obviously not solely, marketed to kids. Game Freak and Nintendo go out of their way to essentially humanize Pokemon so that the audience or players will become emotionally attached to them, and thus emotionally attached to the brand and to the merchandise they want to sell you. It's pretty understandable that people would feel personally repulsed by seeing a look-alike creature that resembles their favorite Pokemon being brutally butchered, but here's the thing. Just because it appears more graphic to you due to your attachment to Pokemon doesn't mean that it's unacceptably gruesome, at least not by common game industry practices. The reason why these same people are upset about the brutal aspects of Palworld and not, let's say, RimWorld, is because they have an emotional attachment to one and not the other. So all I can say in this regard, Palworld really isn't doing anything egregiously wrong or abnormal. You might not like it, but I'm pretty sure there's plenty of other games out there that just aren't for you, and that's fine. If it's not to your taste, just don't play it. However, the last thing I would like to say on this topic relates to a particular mindset I've seen in some of Palworld's defenders regarding the game's brutality. Some people have taken to saying that the reason all the brutal elements are okay is simply because they aren't real, which essentially implies that as long as it's a portrayal of fantasy, it's okay. This is a very dangerous, simplistic mindset, and it's just outright false. There are lines in the mainstream games media industry that should not be crossed. I mean, as an example to illustrate my point, let's take this mindset to the extreme. Are you personally okay with a game that graphically glorifies the kidnapping and exploitation of children in ways I can't even say on YouTube? Are you? I mean, if your answer is yes, then I'm not sure there's any hope of speaking reason to you. There are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, and whether or not a controversial theme in a game should be considered acceptable or not should always depend on the context in which it's used. But the thing that bothers me the most about this mindset is not that it's just wrong or overly simplistic, but also that it tacitly connects its argument to the defense of video game violence against the many anti-video game narratives that have attacked the industry for decades. And that pisses me off. It has been a long, hard fight for the games industry and games community to fend off the baseless claims that video game violence directly leads to real-world violence. And one of the biggest defenses used in fending off these claims is that violence in video games isn't real, which is true. But that argument shouldn't extend to any and all controversial themes. And to try and use it in that way is a very, very bad look for the video games community, and definitely not one that we should attach ourselves to. There has to be a standard of acceptability. I in no way think that Palworld has crossed any lines, but the mindset that some people have been using to defend it should not become a mainstream idea. So, that's all the controversy covered. Now, let's touch on the possibility of a lawsuit. Palworld is obviously an off-brand Pokemon. The inspirations and similarities are just too obvious to ignore. Many members of the gaming community have taken to making direct one-to-one comparisons of some of the most egregious examples of Pokemon Pal lookalikes. Some of them, I personally feel, are distinct enough to not be problematic. However, some others, the similarities are definitely more problematic. And it's for this reason many have suggested that Palworld may be liable for a copyright lawsuit from Game Freak and Nintendo. And it's on this topic that I've been seeing some, I hesitate to say bad takes because not a single one of them is without merit, but I guess it would be most appropriate to say some premature takes, especially considering how absolutely sure so many people seem to be that there either will or won't be a lawsuit. And my take is, we just don't know yet. We can't possibly know yet. Now, I already know what some Palworld defenders might argue. I've seen it used many times in comments and posts about the game. The CEO of PocketPal has officially confirmed that Palworld already went through a series of legal reviews. I know, and here's the thing. That on its own doesn't mean jack. Why, you might ask? Because 1, the way the law is applied, especially in regard to copyright infringement, can be very subjective. And 2, we don't actually know what these legal reviews entailed. Who were the legal experts who conducted the review? Is there any possibility of bias? What assets from the game were included? Did representatives from Game Freak's and Nintendo's legal team participate in this process? What standards were used in this process to determine if copyright had or had not been infringed? We don't know. We don't know any of this. And frankly, it's also possible that PocketPair's CEO could just be lying. Until things are proven, we shouldn't take anything at face value. Now, I'm also well aware of the other go-to defense that Palworld defenders are using. Since the game was in development for around 2 years before its release, and neither Game Freak nor Nintendo saw fit to sue PocketPal at any point during that time frame, that must mean that there is no viable cause for litigation. Except no, that's not how that works. There might have been some truth to that if we knew for sure that both Game Freak and Nintendo were granted complete and total access to Palworld's game assets throughout the entirety of the development process, which that's not really how these things work. Games are usually developed internally while keeping the full scope of their work secret. So, how in the world could Game Freak and Nintendo possibly have known with confidence that they would have a strong case against Pocket Pair if they didn't know the full extent of the suspected crime? Instead, it's more likely that they didn't have full access to Palworld's assets until it was released, which means their legal teams are probably working overtime right now trying to gather every single piece of possible evidence they could potentially use to craft a copyright infringement argument against Pocket Pair. Simply put, the possibility of a lawsuit is by no means an open and shut case. See what I did there? We don't know yet. And it's not like Game Freak and Nintendo are going to tell us if they aren't going to sue Pocket Pair. The more time goes by without news of a lawsuit announcement, the less likely there'll be one. For now, all we can do is make some popcorn, watch, and wait. Although, there is one other element to this that's worth exploring. Let me ask you this. If you knew someone intended to commit a crime, and you wanted that someone to face the worst possible consequences for said crime, do you have the police stop them before they do it, or after? Obviously, the penalties are much worse for committed crimes than they are for planned crimes. So, how does this relate to the Palworld situation? Well, let me ask you something else, and please bear with me, I promise this is going somewhere interesting. If you commit copyright infringement, from which you make a bunch of money, what happens to that money when you get convicted of your crime? Well, very often any money made from stolen copyright assets will be given to the copyright owner. I think you can probably see where this is going now. Earlier, I talked about aggrieved Pokemon fans who may be using Palworld as a statement or message to Game Freak about their anger over the mishandling of their beloved game franchise. I mentioned how I sympathize with these fans and am glad that they're looking for ways to let their discontent be heard, but that I was worried that choosing to use Palworld to express that discontent might be the wrong approach, and how it might end up coming back to bite them. This is what I meant. How deliciously, tragically ironic will it be if Palworld, the game these aggrieved fans used to make a statement against Game Freak, ends up being found guilty of copyright infringement and then is forced to give all those fans' money over to Game Freak. This is an actual possibility right now. We have no idea of how probable it is. Maybe it's not very likely at all. Maybe it's more likely than any of us know. But either way, it definitely is a possibility. And this is the danger of jumping on bandwagons. That's the thing about bandwagons, they have a tendency of driving you right off a cliff. But rest easy, Palworld players. As of right now, the possibility of a lawsuit is still very much up in the air. Well, this video's gone on for way longer than I expected, so let's wrap this up with a little summary, followed up with a conclusion. So, is Palworld controversial? Yes. Is Palworld bad? Time will tell. Should you buy Palworld just to spite Game Freak? No. Was AI used to make Palworld? We don't know. Did Pocket Pair commit copyright infringement? We don't know. Will Pocket Pair get sued? We don't know. There, the Palworld situation in a nutshell. If there's one thing I hope everyone watching this video will take away from it, it's that all the support and all the hate that this game is receiving right now ultimately comes from the same place. People on both sides just want to play fun games. Games that are made by an industry that cares about its workers and its customers and that will work ethically and fairly to continue to make more fun games in the future. So the question is, do Pocket Pair and Palworld actually embody these values? I personally don't think any single one of us can know the answer to that question. At least, not yet. Well, thanks to any of you who watched all the way to the end. I honestly thought that this would be a pretty short video, but the more I talked, the more I realized I had to say. I'm a brand new content creator here on YouTube. In fact, this will probably be my very first video, so Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to see perspectives from all sides of this topic. I think civil, productive dialogue is the backbone of a healthy gaming community, so please try not to be combative and try to understand where the other side is coming from. If you'd like to support the channel, please feel free to subscribe. I'm planning to primarily focus on game reviews in the future, and I'm completely dedicated to not taking any paid sponsorships. I believe in the notion that once a reviewer has shown that their opinion can be bought, they'll always lose some degree of trust from their community. Once I get a good routine going and have a steady flow of content being posted on the channel, I'll open up a Patreon for anyone who wants to help support the channel directly. Well, that's all for this video. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Just as a friendly reminder, don't pre-order video games, and I'll see you next time.